Okay, folks, we are back on the air here, about 7 seconds in. Uh, Welcome to DeeTV. This is the first session that we're going to be doing on a topic. Actually, the first session that we're going to be doing live. I'm going to try to keep these pithy to about 15 minutes of discussion. And the very first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about this idea of information transfer. How does one thing get from an idea from one person to another? For example, seems like a fairly simple idea. You have a person that's transmitting over here, and they want to say something that conveys information across to the other person. Well, most of the time we take for granted that the things we say, if they're important, will impact us, so that if the speaker at the beginning of the line is saying something that is meant to inform the person at the end of the line, then the mere words that are being said should do the trick. But that's not how it works. There are three things in play. You have the sender, you have the receiver, and you have the media in between. Now, one of the things that we can see today in our world is that mainstream media, for example, tells the story that they wish to tell. And thus, the information that was originally put out, for whatever reason, doesn't get fully transmitted across to the receiver. And yet people think they're fully informed. There are a couple of things that have to happen. First of all, whatever or whoever is transmitting the information has to make sure that the language they use is understood at this end. That means that they have to be aware of word definition, they have to be aware of the context in which it's spoken, and they have to have a common language that they're speaking. It kind of makes sense, right? Three big points. What were you talking about? So that's the information around it. What language were you using? And if you're using the same language, do you understand the words the same way? If you don't have that in place, you don't have communication. Oh yeah, you have airflow going across the plane, these molecules of air going over and tickling the receiver over here of my ear. Yeah, you have that, but you don't have information transfer. So the sender has to be aware of those 3 points. What is the receiver's responsibility? This person over here. Well, they have to hear what's being said. They have to listen, which is an act of intent, and then they have to comprehend. Hearing is not the same as listening, nor is listening the same thing as comprehending. Big differences. Hearing is simply the molecules of air striking your ear. Listening is being able to recognize that there's something there that you should listen to, so it takes your will to actually focus on that. And even then, if you're focused on it, if you can't incorporate it into your makeup, into your set of experiences, so that you have a reference point, you're not going to be successful in learning this thing over here. I used to teach software at a company in Connecticut, and it wasn't uncommon for me to try to relate the software specifically back to an individual student's level. I would start out the class and we would be talking about software, and people would raise their hands and they would say, well, I don't understand that. So what I would try to do is I would try to find something that they were interested in. It could be cooking. It could be tailoring. It might be gardening. Could be many things. And I try to take this foreign information that's coming from over here and put it into a frame of reference so that by the time they got over there, I was explaining it in terms of gardening to show that there is a process in everything that occurs. This thing we call communication is very, very delicate. And it's delicate in a couple of ways. Number one, if the transmitter is distorting the information either purposefully or unknowingly, the receiver is not getting the full picture. And that's pretty much where we are today. If it's done maliciously, then the transmitter over here is purposely omitting information that completes the picture. What do I mean? Well, this gets into the idea of what truth is, objective truth. Objective truth is the whole truth. Most of the time we don't deal with truly objective truth. As an example, if it were snowing and sleeting outside and the weather person came up and told you, oh, it's cold outside, it's going to be another blustery day, and you went outside from your 5th floor tenement, walked down below because you didn't look outside the window, you didn't notice it was sleeting, you'd be pretty upset. Well, the person over here didn't tell you a falsehood. It was in fact cold. They just forgot to tell you the other part of that truth, which means that it was also sleeting. Those are called half-truths. In the context of the political world that we find ourselves in, we need all the truth. And right now we have people on both sides and the media in between and people in camps outside those other elements that simply don't tell the whole truth. There's an old adage that my parents used to tell me. It takes, there are always 3 sides to an argument. There's the truth, there's a lie, and whatever's in between. The compromise which is in between. So when you're speaking and transferring information, you have to remember, since context is so important, you have to speak as much truth as the person can understand. Now, you can truthfully say something in a context of a conversation with an individual that is far deeper than they need to know. That's not a lie. Witnessed in the Old Testament where we were called dust. From dust we are made, and dust we will return. We aren't made of dust, we're made of atoms. But it made no sense to tell that person that we're made of atoms. They had no point of reference. Take a young child. It points up to the sky and says, Daddy or Mommy, what color is the sky? And you say, the sky is blue. As far as the child's concerned, that's true, because most children would see that and perceive it as blue. However, that's not a truthful statement. The sky itself is clear. The oxygen we breathe is clear. The sky appears to be blue because of the refracted sunlight off the ice crystals in the upper atmosphere. So there are degrees of truth. And whenever we get into a conversation, we have to make sure that we get the right truth to the right depth of understanding so that an individual can comprehend. And then all of that feeds into their kabasa up here, which doesn't do any thinking at all. It's your spirit and your consciousness are where the actual rendering of reality is, as well as making the decisions on how to animate this thing we call our body. Okay, so these are the things we're going to tackle in the days as they go by. And in that context, we're going to start looking at, first of all, the nature of life. and I'm going to try to get into that, the what, where, when, who, and why we are. The last one is very, very philosophical. I would expect there'll be a lot of questions on that one, but the what we are, we're going to be based on new science that's replacing the Bohr science. That's B-O-H-R science, by the way. And it's based upon the very ideas that Nikola Tesla first espoused many years ago. And it's coming into wider and wider acceptance. It'll take probably another 20 generations because we are people of the stove. By the way, if you haven't heard me say that before, you're going to hear that an awful lot. We are people of the stove. We don't take anything at face value. You got to show it to me. You don't believe it? How many of you have actually put your hand on a hot stove? Why'd you do it? Well, your parents told you it was hot. Is it that you didn't believe your parents? No. You didn't know what hot was. You put your hand on the stove and you get a burn, you say, oh, now I know what hot is. We are people of the stove. Out there, by the way, how many people have put their hand on a stove more than once? How many people have sat down on a fire grill like I have, even after I knew what hot was? I stumbled backwards. It fell into a fire pit. That's a funny story in and of itself, but I still have the scars on my body where the grills burned my flesh all the way up into my bones. And that was a long time ago. That was a long time. That was a bit of an owie, shall we say. All right, we're going to go ahead and cut this off. I hope you all have a very blessed evening. And as we go forward with this, we'll get to know a little bit more about how I think about the world. Hopefully, you'll be able to see what the world really is about. And ultimately, the goal here is to get you into a deeper relationship with Jesus Christ and God the Father. Once you understand who you are, where you are, what you are, why you are, and whose you are. Okay? So have yourself a great evening, folks. This is about 12 minutes or so into the stream. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and bring up my logo, and I'm going to sign myself off, and be well, everybody.